The Nevada desert holds secrets like a grave holds bones, deep, silent, and patient. In the summer of 1987, Highway 50, dubbed America's loneliest road, stretched across the barren landscape like a scar on burnt skin. It was here, on this desolate ribbon of asphalt, that Eleanor Walsh and her granddaughter Megan Taylor would disappear into a mystery so profound that it would haunt investigators for decades. Eleanor, 73 years old, with silver hair she kept in a neat bun, had driven these roads before. Born and raised in Carson City, she knew the desert's moods, its dangers, its unforgiving nature. Her hands, weathered by 7 decades of Nevada sun, gripped the steering wheel of her powder blue 1985 Buick Century with the confidence of someone who had navigated worse. Beside her sat 16-year-old Megan, blonde hair catching the afternoon light streaming through the passenger window, and her Walkman headphones draped around her neck like a technological necklace. And they were heading to Reno, a simple trip. Eleanor's sister Martha had fallen ill, and family duty called stronger than the desert wind. Megan, visiting from California for the summer, had begged to come along. The teenager found her grandmother's Nevada stories fascinating, tales of mining towns, ghost settlements, and the kind of frontier spirit that seemed extinct in her suburban Los Angeles world. At 2:47 p.m. on July 15th, Eleanor stopped for gas at Murphy's Station, a weathered outpost that served as the last reliable fuel stop for 80 miles. The owner, Bill Murphy, remembered them clearly. Eleanor bought a map, even though she knew the route by heart. Megan purchased a Coca-Cola and a package of peanuts. They chatted briefly about the weather. It was going to be hot, Murphy warned, even for July. "You take care out there, Mrs. Walsh," Murphy said, his leathery face creased with genuine concern. "Radio says there might be dust storms rolling in later." Eleanor nodded, folding the map with practiced precision. "We will be in Reno before dark, Bill." "Don't you worry." Those would be the last words anyone heard Eleanor Walsh speak. Murphy watched the Buick pull onto Highway 50, heading west into the shimmering heat. The car disappeared into the distance, becoming just another mirage in the endless Nevada landscape. By nightfall, when Eleanor and Megan failed to arrive at Martha's house in Reno, the desert had already begun weaving its web of silence around them. Martha Walsh Fleming paced her living room floor until the carpet showed wear patterns. Eleanor was never late. Never. In 73 years, her sister had arrived everywhere precisely when she said she would. As midnight approached, Martha's worry transformed into cold dread. She called the Nevada Highway Patrol at 12:23 a.m. on July 16th. Trooper Daniel Hayes took the call. A 10-year veteran of Highway 50's particular brand of tragedy, Hayes had seen what the desert could do to the unprepared. Car breakdowns became death sentences. Wrong turns led to bleached bones found years later by hikers. But Eleanor Walsh wasn't some tourist with a rental car and a poor sense of direction. She was local. She knew better. Hayes organized the initial search at dawn, and 3 patrol units spread out along Highway 50's 180-mile stretch between Carson City and Reno. They looked for the telltale signs: tire tracks leading off the asphalt, disturbed brush, anything that might indicate where the Buick had gone. They found nothing, and the search expanded. Helicopters buzzed overhead like mechanical vultures, their rotors beating the superheated air. Ground teams combed the roadside ravines and dry creek beds. Local volunteers, many who knew Eleanor from decades of church socials and community meetings, walked grid patterns through the sagebrush, calling her name into the vast emptiness. The desert swallowed their voices without echo. By the 3rd day, Detective Ray Morrison from the Washoe County Sheriff's Office had taken over the case. Morrison, a heavy-set man with tired eyes and a mustache that had gone gray during his 20 years of police work, reviewed the facts with growing unease. 2 people, traveling a familiar route in broad daylight, on a road patrolled regularly by state troopers. Simply gone. Ben. "It's like they drove into thin air," Morrison told his partner, Detective Lisa Crane, as they stood beside Highway 50 in the punishing afternoon heat. The asphalt shimmered like black water, creating false pools that vanished as they approached. Brain, younger and still optimistic enough to believe every case had a solution, pointed toward the mountains rising like ancient monuments in the distance. Maybe they took a side road, got turned around. Morrison shook his head. Eleanor Walsh could navigate these roads blindfolded, and every dirt track for 50 miles has been checked twice. The investigation expanded beyond the immediate search area. The authorities contacted hospitals throughout Nevada, California, and Utah. Missing persons reports went out to every law enforcement agency in the western United States. Eleanor's bank accounts showed no unusual activity, but her credit cards remained unused. The Buick's license plate Nevada 847 RKB was entered into every database available in 1987. Still nothing. Nullers so. Months in. As July burned into August, the case began attracting attention beyond Nevada's borders. The story had all the elements that captured public imagination: a grandmother and teenager vanishing without trace on America's loneliest highway. Local newspapers picked up the story first, then regional outlets, finally national television news. Morrison found himself fielding calls from reporters, psychics, and amateur detectives. Each claimed to have the answer. Eleanor and Megan had been abducted by a serial killer. They had encountered extraterrestrials. They had discovered something they shouldn't have and been silenced. They had fallen into an abandoned mine shaft that had subsequently collapsed, hiding the evidence. Every theory led nowhere. As the case file grew thick with reports, photographs, and witness statements that revealed nothing useful, Murphy, the gas station owner, remained the last person to see them alive. His description never varied. Eleanor seemed calm, Megan excited about the trip, nothing unusual or suspicious about their behavior or appearance. 3 months after the disappearance, Morrison made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. He officially reclassified the case as a cold case. Active investigation would continue, but resources would be allocated elsewhere. The desert had claimed Eleanor Walsh and Megan Taylor, just as it had claimed countless others over the decades. The only difference was that their remains had yet to be found. Martha Walsh Fleming refused to accept this conclusion. She hired private investigators, spent her life savings on search efforts, and maintained a constant correspondence with anyone who might have information. Christmas cards to law enforcement agencies became annual reminders that Eleanor and Megan were still missing, still waiting to come home. Years passed. The case faded from public memory, buried under newer mysteries and fresher tragedies. Detective Morrison retired in 1995, still carrying the weight of questions he couldn't answer. Detective Crane transferred to domestic crimes, where the mysteries at least involved human motives she could understand. The file on Eleanor Walsh and Megan Taylor gathered dust in a storage room beneath the Washoe County Courthouse. Occasionally, a new detective would pull it out, hoping fresh eyes might see something the others had missed. They never did. The desert kept its secrets. Then, in November 2004, 17 years after the disappearance, everything changed. Forest Ranger Jake Donovan was conducting a routine survey of fire roads in the Toyabe National Forest, roughly 30 miles north of Highway 50. The area was remote even by Nevada standards, accessible only by a network of dirt tracks that required four-wheel drive and local knowledge to navigate safely. But Donovan, a 28-year-old transplant from Oregon, had been working this sector for 3 years and thought he knew every square mile of his assigned territory. He was wrong. November in the Nevada mountains brought early snow, and Donovan was checking access roads before the winter snows made them impassable. His green Forest Service truck bumped and lurched over the rocky trail, diesel engine laboring in the thin air. He was approximately 8 miles from the nearest paved road when he spotted something that shouldn't exist. And through a gap in the pine trees, sunlight glinted off metal. Donovan stopped his truck and grabbed his binoculars. What he saw defied explanation. A car sat in a small clearing, perfectly positioned as if someone had carefully parked it there. The vehicle appeared to be from the 1980s, powder blue paint still visible despite years of weather exposure. Even from a distance, Donovan could see that all 4 tires were intact, the windows unbroken. It looked like someone had driven there yesterday and walked away, except no one could have driven there. The clearing was surrounded by mature pine trees, their trunks too close together for any vehicle to pass between them. The nearest access point was a hiking trail that wound through rocky terrain completely unsuitable for automobiles. Donovan hiked closer, his breath forming clouds in the cold mountain air. With each step, the impossibility of what he was seeing became more apparent. The car, a Buick Century, he could now determine sat in the center of the clearing like a monument to something incomprehensible. He circled the vehicle slowly, documenting everything with his digital camera. Nevada license plate 847 RKB, the same plate number that had been broadcast on police radios 17 years earlier. The same number that appeared on missing persons flyers that had once covered gas stations and truck stops across the American West. Eleanor Walsh's car had been found. Donovan called his supervisor immediately, using his satellite phone to report the discovery. Within hours, the clearing became a crime scene. Detective Patricia Wells, now handling cold cases for Washoe County, arrived with a full forensics team. And the same questions that had puzzled investigators in 1987 returned with new urgency. How had the car gotten there? The surrounding trees showed no signs of damage, no indication that someone had cut a path and then allowed the forest to regrow. Carbon dating of the tree rings would later confirm what Donovan suspected: the pines had been growing undisturbed for over 30 years. The car's condition presented another puzzle. Despite sitting exposed to mountain weather for nearly 2 decades, the Buick showed minimal deterioration. The paint was faded but not rusted. The interior, when investigators finally opened the locked doors, appeared almost pristine. Eleanor's purse sat on the front seat, contents intact. Megan's Walkman lay on the dashboard, its headphones neatly coiled. But Eleanor and Megan were nowhere to be found. Detective Wells processed the scene with methodical precision. She had read Morrison's original reports, studied the case files, interviewed everyone still alive who had been involved in the initial investigation. Nothing had prepared her for this. "It's like they parked the car and just vanished," Wells told her team as they worked through the mountain evening. Floodlights turned the clearing into a surreal theater, casting stark shadows between the pine trees. Inside the car, investigators found Eleanor's reading glasses on the seat, as if she had just removed them. Megan's California driver's permit was tucked into the sun visor. The road map, the same one Eleanor had purchased at Murphy's Station, lay folded on the dashboard with their route clearly marked in blue ink. But there were no signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of what had happened after the car arrived in this impossible location. The discovery made national news within days. The same reporters who had covered the original disappearance returned to Nevada, now armed with digital cameras and satellite uplinks instead of film cameras and typewriters. The story was even stranger now: a car found in a place it couldn't possibly exist, containing evidence of lives interrupted but no clue about their fate. Theories multiplied like desert wildflowers after rare rain. Skeptics suggested the car had been moved to the clearing by someone with access to heavy equipment, though no tire tracks or equipment marks could be found. Believers in the paranormal saw evidence of alien abduction or temporal anomalies. Government conspiracy theorists speculated about secret military experiments gone wrong. Detective Wells ignored the speculation and focused on facts. The car had been processed for fingerprints. Only Eleanor's and Megan's were found, exactly where they should be. The engine was examined by mechanics. It appeared to be in working condition, though the battery was dead and the gas tank empty. The odometer reading matched the distance from Carson City to the clearing, if such a route were possible, which it wasn't. Every road between Carson City and the mountain clearing had been mapped and surveyed. There was no route that would allow a standard passenger car to reach that location. The terrain was too rough, the grade too steep, the forest too dense. Yet the car was there. As winter deepened and snow began to accumulate around the clearing, Wells made a decision that surprised her colleagues. She ordered the car to be left exactly where it was found, secured and monitored but undisturbed. Something about moving it felt wrong, as if the location itself might hold answers that hadn't yet revealed themselves. The decision proved prescient in ways Wells couldn't have anticipated. On February 14th, 2005, Valentine's Day, Forest Ranger Donovan was conducting another routine patrol when he made a discovery that would transform the Eleanor Walsh case from an unsolved mystery into something approaching the supernatural. He found footprints in the snow around the car. Fresh footprints. 2 sets, one belonging to an elderly woman wearing sensible walking shoes, the other from a teenager in sneakers. The prints circled the car 3 times, then led directly into the forest, heading north toward the mountain peaks that rose like frozen sentinels against the winter sky. Donovan followed the tracks for nearly a mile before they vanished at the edge of a steep ravine, not covered by snow or obscured by weather, simply gone, as if the people making them had learned to fly. Detective Wells arrived within hours, bringing a team of specialists in winter tracking and forensic photography. The prints were documented, measured, and cast in dental stone before the next snowfall could erase them. The analysis confirmed what Donovan had suspected: the footprints were fresh, made within the previous 24 hours. But Eleanor Walsh would be 90 years old now, assuming she was still alive. Megan Taylor would be 33. The woman who had made these prints appeared to be walking with the steady gait of someone in her 70s. The teenager's prints showed the same shoe size and stride pattern as the sneakers found in the car 17 years earlier. The impossible had become more impossible. Word of the footprints leaked to the media within days, despite Wells's attempts to maintain secrecy. Soon the mountain clearing became a pilgrimage site for believers in everything from time travel to interdimensional portals. The Forest Service was forced to post guards to keep the curious at bay. Meanwhile, Wells continued her investigation with the determination of someone who had spent too many years solving puzzles to be defeated by this one. She interviewed Martha Walsh Fleming, now 91 and living in a nursing home in Reno. Martha's eyes sharpened when Wells described the footprints. "That's Eleanor," Martha said with absolute certainty. "I'd know my sister's walk anywhere. She always circled things when she was thinking: cars, houses, problems. Drove our mother crazy when we were children." "Mrs. Fleming," Wells said gently, "your sister would be 90 years old now. The footprints suggest someone much younger." Martha's smile carried secrets that decades couldn't erode. "Eleanor always said this desert was older than time itself. Maybe time works differently here." As spring arrived and the snow melted, revealing the mountain clearing once again, Wells established a monitoring station. Motion-activated cameras were placed strategically around the car and the surrounding forest. If Eleanor and Megan returned, and Wells was increasingly convinced they would, she intended to be ready. The cameras captured nothing for weeks. Then, on May 30th, 2005, something appeared on the footage that would change everything Wells thought she understood about the case. At 3:17 a.m., the cameras detected movement. 2 figures approached the car from the north, moving with the same purposeful stride that had left prints in the February snow. They appeared to be examining the vehicle, possibly looking for something inside. But when Wells reviewed the footage the next morning, she saw something that made her hands tremble as she rewound and replayed the video. The figures on the tape appeared exactly as they had on July 15, 1987. Eleanor Walsh looked 73 years old, her silver hair neat despite her mountain trek. Megan Taylor appeared to be 16, blonde hair catching the infrared light of the security cameras. Neither had aged a single day in 18 years. The footage showed them circling the car 3 times, just as the footprints had indicated. Then Eleanor reached into her purse, the same purse that investigators had found on the front seat, and removed something small. She handed it to Megan, who nodded and tucked the object into her jacket pocket. The 2 figures then turned and walked directly toward the camera. For just a moment, Eleanor's eyes seemed to look straight into the lens. Her lips moved, forming words the audio couldn't capture. Then both figures simply faded away, becoming translucent before disappearing entirely. Wells watched the footage dozens of times, bringing in video analysts and technical experts to confirm what she was seeing. The consensus was unanimous: the footage was authentic, unaltered, and completely impossible. But the mystery was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Because when Wells and her team returned to the clearing the next day, they found something that Eleanor had left behind. Something that would finally begin to explain the inexplicable and reveal a truth more disturbing than any of them had imagined. Tucked under the Buick's windshield wiper was a piece of paper written in Eleanor Walsh's careful handwriting. The message was brief, but its implications would haunt Wells for the rest of her career. "They are not done with us yet. Find the others before it's too late." Detective Patricia Wells stared at the handwritten note until the words burned into her vision like afterimages. Eleanor Walsh's careful script, unchanged by 18 years of whatever impossible journey had claimed her and Megan, posed more questions than it answered. 3 sentences that transformed a missing persons case into something far more sinister. "They are not done with us yet. Find the others. But before it's too late." Others. The word carried implications that made Wells's skin crawl in the mountain morning air. She photographed the note from every angle before carefully bagging it as evidence, though evidence of what she couldn't say. The handwriting analysis would later confirm her suspicions. It was definitely Eleanor's hand, written with the same blue ink pen found in her purse inside the Buick. Wells returned to Carson City with a sense of urgency that surprised her own team. 23 years in law enforcement had taught her to be methodical, patient, thorough. But something about Eleanor's message suggested time was running short for people she didn't even know existed yet. The phrase "find the others" implied a pattern. If Eleanor and Megan's disappearance wasn't an isolated incident, then somewhere in the vast database of unsolved cases, then other families might be waiting for answers that had eluded investigators for decades. Wells began her search in the most logical place: missing persons reports from Highway 50 and the surrounding desert regions. The Nevada Department of Public Safety's records stretched back to 1962, when the state first began computerizing case files. What she found in those dusty digital archives would keep her awake for weeks, and the pattern wasn't immediately obvious. Spread across 4 decades, the disappearances seemed random, unconnected. A geologist from the University of Nevada vanished in 1974 while conducting mineral surveys. And a family of 4 from Colorado disappeared in 1981 during a cross-country vacation. 2 long-haul truckers, traveling separate routes, went missing within a month of each other in 1995. But when Wells plotted the locations on a map, a disturbing picture emerged. Every disappearance occurred within a roughly circular area, centered on the mountain clearing where Eleanor's car had been found. The radius extended approximately 50 miles in all directions, encompassing some of the most remote and unforgiving terrain in North America. 15 cases over 40 years. 37 people who had simply vanished without leaving behind so much as a footprint or tire track. All experienced desert travelers, all driving reliable vehicles, all disappearing in broad daylight on well-traveled roads. Wells spread the case files across her office floor like pieces of a massive, incomprehensible puzzle. Each folder represented families destroyed by uncertainty, investigators frustrated by impossible circumstances, and questions that grew more disturbing with each passing year. Dr. James Morrison, the geologist, had been conducting a routine mineral survey for a mining company in 1974. His colleagues expected him back at base camp by evening. When he failed to return, search teams found his campsite exactly as he had left it: tent erected, equipment organized, coffee still warm in his metal cup. His 4-wheel drive Jeep was gone, along with his survey instruments and field notes. The search for Morrison lasted 3 weeks and covered over 200 square miles. Helicopters, ground teams, even bloodhounds brought in from California. They found nothing. The desert had swallowed James Morrison as completely as it would later claim Eleanor and Megan. The Colorado family, Robert and Diana Kent, along with their twin daughters Amy and Sarah, ages 12, had been traveling Highway 50 in August 1981. Their last confirmed sighting was at a gas station in Fallon, where Robert had asked for directions to the nearest campground. The station attendant, now deceased, had recommended several locations in the Toyabe National Forest. The family's Winnebago was found 3 months later by a deer hunter, parked beside a hiking trail 12 miles from the nearest road. Just like Eleanor's Buick, the recreational vehicle sat in a location it couldn't possibly have reached. The surrounding terrain was too rough, too steep, too narrow for such a large vehicle to navigate. Inside the Winnebago, investigators found the family's belongings undisturbed, clothes neatly folded in drawers, board games set up on the dinette table as if interrupted mid-play. Diana's diary, with the final entry dated the day they disappeared, described their excitement about seeing real wilderness for the first time. The truckers Miguel Santos in March 1995 and Terry Hutchinson in April of the same year presented a different puzzle. Both were veterans of Highway 50, men who had driven these routes hundreds of times without incident. Both disappeared while hauling standard cargo loads on clear, calm days. Santos was carrying automobile parts from Reno to Salt Lake City. His 18-wheeler was found by a state trooper, parked beside the road with its hazard lights flashing. The trailer was empty, though bills of lading indicated it should have contained 3 tons of manufactured goods. Santos was nowhere to be found, and his logbook showed no record of any stops or delays. Hutchinson's disappearance was even stranger. His truck, loaded with construction materials bound for Las Vegas, was discovered on a ranch access road 25 miles from Highway 50. The vehicle had been carefully parked, aligned perfectly with fence posts, as if positioned by someone with surveying experience. Hutchinson's lunch sat half-eaten on the passenger seat. His CB radio was tuned to the emergency channel, microphone hanging loose, as if he had been interrupted while calling for help. Wells studied each case with growing unease. While the disappearances shared common elements that defied logical explanation. Vehicles found in impossible locations, that personal belongings left undisturbed, and no signs of struggle, mechanical failure, or external interference. Most disturbing of all, none of the missing people had ever been found, alive or dead. But it was the timeline that truly chilled Wells to her core. The disappearances weren't random, they followed a pattern that became clear only when she arranged them chronologically. Every 7 to 8 years, the circle of vanishings would claim new victims. The intervals weren't exact, but they were consistent enough to suggest purpose rather than coincidence. If the pattern held, the next disappearance should occur sometime in 2012 or 2013. Wells felt time pressing against her like physical weight. Eleanor's note had warned that they weren't done yet, and the evidence suggested another family might soon join the growing list of the vanished. But who were they, and what did they want with ordinary people traveling through the Nevada desert? The answer began to emerge when Wells decided to visit the locations where each vehicle had been found. Armed with GPS coordinates and a 4-wheel drive truck, she spent 2 weeks in July 2005 traveling to every impossible parking spot in her expanding investigation. What she discovered defied everything she thought she knew about the American Southwest. But each location, from the clearing where Eleanor's Buick waited to the ranch road where Terry Hutchinson's semi had been positioned, shared characteristics that weren't immediately obvious on paper. They were all situated on high ground with clear views of the surrounding landscape, and they were all accessible by foot from multiple directions, despite being unreachable by vehicle. Most significantly, they were all located at points where underground water sources came closest to the surface. Wells began carrying a metal detector and geological survey equipment on her expeditions. What she found beneath the desert soil would have seemed like science fiction if she hadn't documented everything with photographs and geological surveys. Underground, in caverns and tunnels that appeared on no government maps, lay evidence of habitation, not recent human presence, but something far older and more disturbing. Carved passages that followed no architectural principles Wells recognized. Chambers with smooth walls that showed no tool marks or construction methods. And everywhere, a substance that resembled metal but felt organic to the touch, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. The underground network was vast, connecting all the disappearance sites in a web of passages that stretched beneath hundreds of square miles of desert. Wells explored what she could safely access, documenting her findings with the methodical precision of someone who knew she was recording evidence that few would believe. In one chamber, located directly beneath the spot where James Morrison's Jeep had been found, Wells made a discovery that confirmed her worst fears. Personal belongings, carefully arranged on stone shelves carved into the chamber walls. Morrison's field notebook, its pages filled with geological observations that became increasingly frantic toward the end. On a child's doll that matched the description of one belonging to the Kent twins. Miguel Santos's trucker cap, positioned beside a CB radio that couldn't possibly receive signals so far underground. But it was what she found in the deepest accessible chamber that made Wells understand the true horror of Eleanor's message. A collection of photographs, hundreds of them, showing every person who had disappeared over the past 40 years. But these weren't driver's license photos or family snapshots. They were surveillance photographs, taken with telephoto lenses from impossible distances. The pictures of James Morrison taking soil samples weeks before his disappearance. At the Kent family eating lunch at a roadside picnic area. Miguel Santos checking his truck's tires at a rest stop. Someone or something had been watching these people long before they vanished. Studying them. Planning. Wells photographed everything she could safely document, then sealed the chamber and returned to the surface. The implications of her discoveries were staggering, but she had no idea how to proceed with evidence that challenged every assumption about the case. That night, camping in her truck beside Highway 50, Wells was awakened by the sound of footsteps on gravel. And through her windshield, illuminated by starlight, she saw two familiar figures walking toward her vehicle. Eleanor Walsh and Megan Taylor approached with the same purposeful stride Wells had observed on the security footage. They looked exactly as they had 18 years earlier, untouched by time or hardship. Eleanor tapped gently on the passenger window, her expression urgent but not threatening. Wells rolled down the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Eleanor?" "Lenore." Detective Wells. Eleanor's voice carried the same measured authority Wells remembered from witness interviews with Martha Fleming. "You found the chambers." It wasn't a question. Somehow, Eleanor knew exactly what Wells had discovered beneath the desert. "What happened to you?" Wells asked. "Where have you been?" Eleanor's smile was sad, haunted by knowledge Wells couldn't yet comprehend. "Time moves differently down there. We have been trying to warn people for what feels like decades, but up here it's only been a few years." "Who's holding you? What do they want?" Not holding, Megan spoke for the first time, her teenage voice carrying the weight of impossible experience. "Studying. They are studying us, trying to understand how we think, how we react, and they have been doing it for centuries." Eleanor nodded, her expression growing more urgent. "The pattern is accelerating. They used to take people every decade, then every 8 years, now every 5. Something is changing down there, and they need more subjects for their research." "Research into what?" "How to become us," Eleanor said simply. "They are not human, Detective Wells. They never were. But they are learning to pretend." The implications hit Wells like physical blows. If Eleanor was telling the truth, then something non-human had been abducting people from the Nevada desert for decades, and studying them in underground facilities that existed outside normal space and time. Learning to mimic human behavior, human thought patterns, human society. "The next one will be soon," Megan added, glancing nervously toward the mountains. "Within days, a family traveling through on vacation. Look, they are already being watched." "Can you stop it?" Wells asked desperately. Eleanor shook her head. "We can only warn, and we can only appear for short periods before they notice we are gone." "But you can stop it, Detective. You know where they will be taken." "How?" "One. The chambers you found are just the beginning. There's a central facility deeper than the others, beneath the mountain where you found my car. If you can get there during the transition while they are bringing the new subjects down, you might be able to disrupt the process." Eleanor reached through the window and pressed something into Wells's hand. A small metal object, warm to the touch and covered with the same disturbing patterns Wells had seen carved into the chamber walls. "This will get you past their security systems," Eleanor explained. But you have to understand, once you go down there, you might not come back up. They don't like to be interrupted. What about you and Megan? Can I get you out? Eleanor's expression grew infinitely sad. We have been changed too much, Detective. We exist between their world and yours now. But the others, the ones they haven't finished studying yet, they might still have a chance. Before Wells could ask more questions, Eleanor and Megan began to fade, becoming translucent in the starlight. Remember, Eleanor's voice echoed as if from a great distance, the transition happens at dawn. You will have minutes, not hours. Then they were gone, leaving Wells alone with the Nevada night and a metal object that felt alive in her palm. Wells spent the remaining hours until sunrise making preparations she hoped she'd never need to use. She left detailed reports with her supervisor, sealed copies of all her evidence in a safe deposit box, and wrote letters to her family explaining what she was about to attempt. As the first light of dawn touched the eastern mountains, Wells's radio crackled with an urgent transmission from the highway patrol. A family from Oregon, parents and 2 young children, had failed to check in at their planned stop in Reno. Their last confirmed location was Highway 50, somewhere near the turnoff to the Toyabe National Forest. The pattern was continuing, just as Eleanor had warned. Wells drove to the mountain, clearing with a sense of inevitability that surprised her. The Buick still sat in its impossible location, but now she understood it wasn't really impossible at all. It was positioned exactly where the underground facility needed it to be. Using the metal device Eleanor had given her, Wells found the hidden entrance to the chamber system. A section of granite that looked solid swung inward at her touch, revealing stairs that descended into darkness older than human civilization. As she descended into the depths, Wells could hear voices echoing from somewhere far below. The family, parents calling to their children, children crying for their parents. The Oregon family had already been taken, and their processing had begun. The deeper Wells went, the more the architecture around her defied human understanding. Passages that curved in directions that shouldn't exist. Chambers that were simultaneously vast and claustrophobic. Walls covered with symbols that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. Finally, she reached a central chamber larger than any she had previously discovered. And there, in the center of a space that felt infinite, she found them all. Every person who had disappeared over the past 40 years stood in perfect formation, their eyes vacant, their movements synchronized like a terrifying ballet. James Morrison, unchanged since 1974, the Kent family, still wearing their 1981 vacation clothes, and the truckers, the geologist, dozens of others she recognized from missing persons reports. But they weren't really there anymore. Wells could see that immediately. These were copies, templates, shells being used to perfect some incomprehensible masquerade. At the edge of the formation, she saw the Oregon family, David and Lisa Hartwell, with their children Michael and Emma. They were still themselves, still fighting the process, but Wells could see the change beginning in their eyes. Above them all, suspended in the chamber's impossible geometry, hung the architects of this decades-long horror. They were shapes rather than beings, existing in dimensions Wells's mind couldn't properly process. But she could feel their attention turning toward her, ancient and hungry and absolutely inhuman. The metal device Eleanor had given her began to pulse with heat in her hand. Without understanding how she knew, Wells realized it was a weapon not in any conventional sense, but something designed to disrupt the entity's control over this place. She had one chance. One moment before the things above her could react. Wells activated the device. The chamber filled with light that wasn't light, sound that wasn't sound, sensation that had no name in human language. The perfect formation of the missing people wavered, their synchronized movements faltering as whatever controlled them suddenly lost focus. For just a moment, Wells saw them as they really were, not copies or templates, but prisoners, conscious and aware and screaming silently for 40 years, while their bodies were used as research subjects in an experiment too vast for human comprehension. Then the chamber began to collapse. Wells ran through passages that were already changing, stairs that led in directions they hadn't led moments before. Behind her, she could hear the entity's furious sound like reality tearing at the seams. The mountain shook, granite cracking under stresses that had nothing to do with geology. She reached the surface just as the hidden entrance sealed itself forever, leaving no trace that it had ever existed. In the clearing, Eleanor's Buick sat exactly where it had been found, but now it looked genuinely abandoned, paint faded, windows cracked, 18 years of weather damage finally catching up to it in the space of seconds. The Oregon family stood beside the car, confused but alive. David Hartwell held his daughter, while Lisa comforted their son. They had no memory of being underground, no recollection of anything after stopping for gas in Fallon. "Where are we?" Lisa asked Wells, her voice shaky but normal. "What happened to our car?" Wells looked around the clearing, noting that the trees were exactly as they had been, mature pines with no gaps, no way for a vehicle to have entered. The Hartwell's SUV was nowhere to be seen, presumably still sitting wherever the entities had first taken them. "You have been in an accident," Wells lied, already formulating a story that would make sense to everyone involved. "Your car went off the road. You have been unconscious for a while. It took hours to coordinate the rescue, to get the family medical attention, to file reports that would satisfy insurance companies and curious relatives." Wells handled it all with the efficiency of someone who understood that some truths were too dangerous to share. But late that night, alone in her office, Wells opened the case files one more time. 15 disappearances over 40 years. 37 people taken by something that shouldn't exist, imprisoned in a facility that couldn't be mapped, and studied by entities that had been preparing for some incomprehensible purpose. The Hartwell family had been saved, but what about the others? James Morrison, the Kent family, the truckers, were they still down there? Still conscious, still trapped in whatever remained of the underground complex? Wells would spend the rest of her career searching for answers she never found. The chamber entrance never reopened, despite her repeated attempts to locate it. The metal device Eleanor had given her crumbled to dust within days of the rescue, leaving no evidence of its existence. But sometimes, on clear desert nights when the stars seemed closer than they should, Wells thought she could see figures walking among the sagebrush. Familiar figures from case files and missing persons reports. Eleanor Walsh and Megan Taylor, James Morrison and the Kent family, all the others who had vanished into the Nevada desert over the decades, still walking, still searching, still trying to warn the living about dangers that lurked beneath the loneliest road in America. And sometimes, when the wind was just right, Wells thought she could hear them calling across the vast emptiness, voices carrying messages about other places, other disappearances, other families who might need saving before it was too late. And the pattern had been broken, but the entities that created it were older than human civilization, and they had been patient for centuries. They could be patient for centuries more. Highway 50 still stretches across the Nevada desert, still earning its reputation as America's loneliest road. Travelers still disappear occasionally, though never again in the systematic pattern that had marked the previous 40 years. Detective Patricia Wells retired in 2010, officially citing health concerns. Unofficially, she couldn't stop seeing those synchronized figures in the underground chamber. Couldn't stop wondering how many other ancient horrors might be waiting beneath the seemingly empty landscape of the American West. The case files on Eleanor Walsh, Megan Taylor, and all the others remain officially unsolved. Cold cases that generated no leads, no evidence, no closure for the families left behind. But in a storage room beneath the Washoe County Courthouse, sealed in a box marked with security classifications that few people have clearance to read, sits a collection of photographs that tell a different story. Pictures taken in chambers that officially never existed, showing evidence of an experiment that lasted 40 years and might have been preparing for something far worse. The last photograph in the collection shows an empty chamber, its walls cracked and crumbling, its impossible architecture finally succumbing to structural failure. But in the corner, barely visible in the inadequate light, a symbol remains carved into the stone. The same symbol that appears on missing persons reports from Montana, from Oregon, from remote areas throughout the western United States. The experiment in Nevada may have ended, but something suggests the entities behind it simply moved their operations elsewhere. And somewhere in the vast American wilderness, families are still disappearing on clear days, traveling familiar roads, and vanishing into mysteries that few will ever be equipped to solve. The desert keeps its secrets. But sometimes, for those who know how to look, it also provides warnings.